In this video, I'm going to be discussing the volitional mind and particularly the I consciousness that is experiencing the ever now and spontaneity in relation to the synthesis of our own existence. This is another centralizing concern of existential, direct philosophizing that tends to characterize a lot of more of the deeper contemplative existential thinkers, myself included, that's concerned with the seemingly and also the deemed spontaneity of our existence that seems to originate with the first self, and that's also how we connect and understand and come to know the ego through our relations with what we particularly preliminarily find meaningful and which we realize is good enough, and which can help us to recognize things like perfectionisms and also appreciate the truth and the psychological law of imperfection and the nature of accepting things like imperfection as being something that genuinely promotes greater positivity and optimal qualities of experience through allowing us to detach from imperfectionisms or to recognize thoughtfully areas of attachments and sources of attachments that end up producing negativities in our lives, and also a sense of meaninglessness and perceptions of paradoxical meaninglessness, more meaningful, or more or less meaningfulness within our existences, in which we tend to experience various negative states of emotion in relation to that, and which impacts how we embody what's good or ideal and our ideations of what we would like and endeavor for in the future. And when we come to recognize how various experiences of our direct emotional experiences influence the affects of our experiential states, our consciousness, and our direct awareness of the thingness within relation to our very synthesis of our existence, we can come to understand meaning as it occurs in this incorporeal, corporeal dynamic that is characterized by these psychophysiological processes in which are paralleled and radially linked to our mind, body, and behavior, as well as our consciousness, and informs us of what the psyche deems and finds to be meaningful in relation to our own self knowledge regarding the existence and syntheses of the mind, and the volitional mind in particular, which informs us of our own psychological abilities in relation to our mind and ourself, and allows us to place a distance between the mind and the self and be more contemplative in our philosophizings regarding the nature and understanding of our own self that's conducive to greater self-knowledge, and also strengthening our minds and volitions to be able to generate more freedom for ourselves and opportunity through this volitional conscience, and a conscience that calls and directs us waywards to be able to increase the degree of freedom within the self direction, in which is innate and intrinsic to various processes of learning and strengthening, and which recognize our individuated, individually different strengths that tend to be optimizers of well-being, but not just well-being, of self-virtue, and which tend to inspire as well as ignite this enterprising course of volition intrinsic to the eye of the mind, in which I experience states and experiences of positivity as well as meaningful interest and engagement that is future oriented and tends to be optimistic in creating its in terms of understanding the nature of things like the law of indeterminacy, its own set of principles and preliminary principles that tend to optimize an individual's own existence through understanding the universal properties of the thingness and the boundness of our existence related to these material and immaterial substances, that through understanding the psychological truths and realistic truths and what's really true in regards to our own subjective experiences and what we find and deem meaningful, but also worthwhile and worth endeavoring for, we start to move in these volitional and willful directions towards enterprising goods and necessities that maintain our positive well-being and promote greater positivity that is radiant to our surroundings and that tends to benefit others and offers an exemplar through our expressions of the self, our expressiveness, as well as the conscience of our minds that gives a piece of our minds in terms of its expressed content, character, symbol, and representations to a surrounding, inquiring set of minds that are attentive to what tends to be the goods and the necessities, as well as the virtue that promotes positive relations throughout civilization, and not just the self, but which begins from one's own existence and ironically throughout whim or wit or necessarily a willful desire has this potentially immediate and subsequent positive impact that we may have never intended or we may have intended through our conscience, and which ends up promoting greater expansive opportunities for deepening knowledge and wisdom through positivity and our self-virtues and virtuousness. So that's all I wanted to say for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.